Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Ignition News. It is January 2nd, 2026. We're starting the new year with some stark reminders about who really runs this country. So let's get into it. First of all, let me tell you everything that you need to know. And I've got a quick update. For 2025, we had a pretty massive update to the number of billionaires in the world. And the 500 richest people added a record $2.2 trillion to their collective wealth in 2025. That's trillion with a T, trillion. Just 8 big tech billionaires, Elon Musk, Bezos, Ellison, Dell, and the Google founders, Huang and Zuckerberg, they captured a quarter of those gains. Meanwhile, billions of people, obviously worldwide, live in poverty. Obviously, the system is not just broken, it's working exactly as it's designed if you're a billionaire to capture and hoard wealth at the very top. And in international news, 14 countries, including France, Britain, Germany, and Canada, have condemned Israel's approval of 19 new settlements in the occupied West Bank. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich explicitly stated the move aims to present the establishment of a Palestinian state. The UN reports settlement expansion has reached its highest level since tracking began in 2017, with the settlements increasing from 141 in 2022 to 210 today. A reminder to you that all of these settlements are illegal under international law. Good morning, everybody. It is broadcast time. Welcome to the Ignition News, your daily news updates. Brought to you by, of course, Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. We have important stories today that we want to get to, but first I want to just say hello. The Ignition News is a brand new daily news show broadcasting on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, anywhere where you get podcasts, you can get the Ignition News. And if you can't find it, just go ahead and type in your browser theignition.news and you'll find us there. It's a free show, but we do need your support. Why? Because we want the advertisers to pay for your news. That's right. So go ahead and follow along. We have, as a good news, we're entering the new week with 3 times as many followers on Spotify and something like 10 times the number of downloads of the first week. So the show's kicking off. It's growing a little bit faster than I hoped, but it's not growing as fast as we needed to. So if you're not yet following the show on any of those platforms, you can't just watch it live, although I know it's really, really fun. Let's get into the next story of the day on January 2nd. A new reporting from the Wall Street Journal has added damning details to Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And guess what? It all centers in Mar-a-Lago. Of course, what we've known for many years now is that the Mar-a-Lago resort has, many, many employees, that it sent typically a lot of its employees, young women, to Epstein's nearby mansion for massage appointments and other services. What we're now learning is that this was not occasional. This went on for many, many years. And of course, the kicker here is Epstein wasn't even a paying member of the club, but Trump personally instructed staff to treat him like he was a paying member of the club. So spa employees specifically warned each other about Epstein. They knew he was obviously sexually suggestive and that he had serious problems that happened during his appointments. This was common knowledge among staff, but the house calls continued. It finally stopped in 2003 when an 18-year-old beautician returned from Epstein's mansion and reported to managers that he had pressured her. A manager sent a fax urging Trump to ban Epstein. Trump agreed, but notably this incident was never reported to Palm Beach police. This is the same time period, by the way, when Ghislaine Maxwell recruited Virginia Guffrey from Mar-a-Lago. Guffrey was 16 years old, working as a spa attendant. Maxwell approached young workers about, quote, side jobs, telling them they could earn extra money and giving massages to her friend. Jeffrey later described being abused and assaulted on her first visit to Epstein's mansion, followed by years of abuse. Trump's ex-wife, Marla Maples, reportedly warned in the mid-1990s that there was something, quote, off about Epstein. Staff knew, management knew, and Trump maintained this relationship from the late 1980s through 2003. The White House is calling this reporting fallacy and innuendo. but these accounts come from former employees and contemporaneous records. Trump himself claimed he dropped Epstein, but only after an 18-year-old employee filed a direct complaint that made it impossible to maintain plausible deniability. This is not ancient history, by the way. This is not ancient history. But what we are learning from this new reporting is that as much as Trump and the White House want to distance themselves from Epstein, the connection to Epstein was literally the phone call is coming from inside the house, and the house happens to be Mar-a-Lago. Now the connections are clearer and clearer than ever. The pipeline to Epstein appears to be at least partially a pipeline straight from the sewage that is Mar-a-Lago. Gross. I don't know why everyone is still honestly arguing about this story. It's so blatantly clear that not only is the president in the files, but he's directly connected to and now covering up for Epstein, Maxwell, and as he told Marjorie Taylor Greene, his quote unquote friends. Hopefully the victims get the justice they deserve, but we're not going to stop talking about this story, even though I'll be honest with you, some of this stuff is really, it's disgusting behavior, it's disgusting. I honestly, it's difficult to talk about, but we do need to talk about it because we can't let this just wash away. We can't let it go away. Next story. Speaking of how little the president cares for victims, and especially how little the president and this administration cares for the most vulnerable. The connection from the Epstein pipeline at Mar-a-Lago, the abuse of young women that happened not only from Mar-a-Lago and with Epstein, but now continues some 23 years later. The Trump administration, this is an update to a previous story. The Trump administration has now officially froze childcare funding to all 50 states, ostensibly to combat fraud. Again, we've talked about this earlier on earlier episodes of the show. I do want to update you now, as a lot of people on Spotify were commenting this yesterday, saying, oh, it's actually all 50 states. Yes, it is. This is an update to the story. Whereas before the president had just frozen funding to the state of Minnesota, now the administration has officially froze childcare funding to all 50 states. But let's talk about what's really happening here. Good morning, everyone. If you're just catching up to us, this is the Ignition News. We are unfiltered, uncensored, and unbought. I do not have to submit our news scripts to Bari Weiss prior to airing, but that means you have to follow along. So here's what we know more specifically. Initially, the administration targeted Minnesota specifically, claiming widespread fraud in the state's childcare system. This move came after conservative YouTuber Nick Shirley posted a video claiming daycare centers run by Somali Americans were defrauding the state of up to $100 million. This is a claim based on visiting some facilities and making sweeping accusations with very little evidence. Tim Walz called this exactly what it is. The president is using an issue he doesn't actually care about to hurt working families. Walz pointed out the irony, of course, the fact that Trump commuted the 7-year prison sentence of David Gentile, a private equity executive convicted of defrauding more than 10,000 investors. So the president's actually letting actual fraudsters out of prison while freezing childcare for millions of children across the country. All 50 states have to provide additional verification now and administrative data before receiving funding from the Childcare and Development Fund. Minnesota specifically faces more hurdles, and the administration is calling for audits of data of childcare centers. Keith Ellison, who is the Attorney General of Minnesota, said his team is exploring all legal options, calling this a hasty, scorched earth attack on essential services. He obviously also mentioned that the administration recently gave 4 Minnesota counties 1 month to conduct in-person interviews with about 100,000, listen to this, 100,000 recipients receiving SNAP benefits to verify eligibility. Now, the problem in itself is not the verification and the authentication in order to receive benefits. The problem is that this government has stripped itself of the administrative state necessary to actually do that work. And they very well do know that information. So they're taking away the funds, saying you have to verify it, but they have not put in systems and practices and infrastructure to actually do that work. So this tells us quite plainly that this is not about fraud prevention. And of course, we've seen the same pattern from the administration before, whether that was through DOJ or just general incompetence. Apparently, the administration can find plenty of money to build a ballroom or to build an arch to the president or to slap his name on the side of the Kennedy Center. But when it comes to finding adequate resources for poor families across the country, well, the lights are out. What this actually does is it very, very imminently threatens essential childcare funding It threatens essential funding for things like parents being able to go to work. And the cycle of abuse that happens here is something that I think we look at it on the surface and we say, they froze funding subject to additional verification. Well, if you're one of those parents who needs to put your child in daycare to go to work, your entire life has now been disrupted. And that's why we're talking about it. The chaos is the point, the cruelty is the point, and, well, unfortunately, it is being successful as of right now. Let's go ahead and kick it over to a special segment about Real ID. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into the Ignition News. Let's check out this story about Real ID.
Do you remember what it was like to get your Real ID? Well, the next story would be funny if it was not so dystopian. The Department of Homeland Security, the same agency that created and certifies Real ID, now says Real ID is too unreliable to confirm United States citizenship. Let that sink in. After 20 years of implementation, after states spent billions of dollars creating a national identification system, DHS is now arguing in federal court that these IDs can't be trusted to prove citizenship. This came up in a lawsuit filed by the Institute for Justice on behalf of Leo Garcia Venegas, an Alabama construction worker who was detained by ICE twice during immigration raids despite being a U.S. citizen. Both times, masked federal immigration officers entered private construction sites without warrants and detained workers based on their apparent ethnicity. He showed his Real ID, and that was the document that basically was supposed to be his proof of citizenship. But in a December 11th filing, the acting assistant special agent in charge of DHS's mobile office stated, Real ID can be unreliable to confirm United States citizenship because each state has its own compliance laws and may issue Real IDs to non-citizens. The Institute for Justice correctly noted how absurd this position is. Real IDs require proof of citizenship or lawful status. DHS is the very agency responsible for certifying that Real IDs, including Alabama's Star IDs, satisfy this requirement. So, DHS spent 2 decades forcing the system on states, certifying that they meet federal standards, requiring people to provide documentation, and now says they can't be trusted. When pressed, a DHS spokesman said Real IDs aren't immigration documents, they just make identification harder to forge. But, and this is a big but, Venegas is a U.S. citizen. He's not required to carry immigration documents because he's an American. The burden is on the government to prove someone is here unlawfully, not on citizens to prove they have the right to exist. So this is where we are. A national ID system that the Department of Homeland Security created, that DHS certifies, and now the Department of Homeland Security says doesn't work. This is all while using immigration enforcement as an excuse to conduct warrantless raids on private property and to detain American citizens just based on how they look. The Fourth Amendment, it still exists, but in practice, just barely.
All right, that is a wild story. In case just to summarize, DHS implemented Real ID. How many of you had a difficult time getting your Real ID? It was a nightmare. It took me actually 3 appointments to the DMV. The first time I tried to get my Real ID, I forgot one piece of document. I had been waiting for my appointment for like 3 months. I forgot like one document that was essential. I had to go back, and then I couldn't get back in for another year. But now the Department of Homeland Security is saying, hey, the Real ID that we set up, the whole purpose, the system was to be able to have a verifiable ID. So that's wild. Now they're saying when we arrest people, it's easy to fake Real ID. So let's get into the next story on the Ignition News, and that is about student loans. Major changes are coming to federal student loans that take effect this year, and borrowers need to know what is coming. Starting July 1st, 2026, the Department of Education will begin eliminating existing income-driven repayment plans and replacing them with 2 options, a standard repayment plan and a new repayment assistance plan. RAP. It's called RAP. That's interesting. The standard plan sets fixed payments over 10 to 25 years based on your original balance. The RAP, the repayment assistance plan, is the income-based option, setting payments at 1 to 10% of your income with a minimum monthly payment of $10 and forgiveness after 10 years. Here's the timeline. If you took out loans before July 1st, 2026, you will have until 2028 to enroll in RAP before the other plans phase out. If you take out loans after July 1st, 2026, RAP and the standard payment plan are your only option. There are borrowing caps now. Graduate students are capped at $20,500 per year or $100,000 per lifetime, and professional students $50,000 per year or $200,000 per lifetime. And this does have essentially the effect of eliminating some people from seeking higher education. Obviously, the SAVE plan has been tied up in litigation and is effectively ending. The president changed the public service loan forgiveness rules effective July 1st as well, and the department can deny forgiveness to workers whose government or nonprofit employers engage in what they call substantial illegal purpose. This is defined not by courts, but by the education secretary. So, ostensibly, it's being packaged as a good thing, but they're limiting access to available funds and they're making it much more difficult to have your loans forgiven. And they can ostensibly now basically cancel your student loan forgiveness if they don't like your politics. The reality, of course, is that millions of borrowers now face higher monthly payments as a result of these changes, tax bills on forgiveness, and political tests on whether their employers are ideologically acceptable to have their loans waived. And our final story of the day, by the way, is about Iran. I want to talk about Iran because I think it's probably the most ironic story. Thank you everybody for following along for the January 2nd issue of the Ignition News. If you're wondering where to find us, just go to theignition.news, theignition.news, or follow us on any of your favorite podcast platforms. This story is wild because of its irony. Tensions in Iran are obviously bubbling up. In Iran, economic protests have turned deadly this week. The demonstration started Sunday when Tehran shopkeepers went on strike over high prices and the government's handling of the currency crisis. You will remember from our earlier reporting that the capital of Iran is actually probably going to have to move because they are running out of water. So obviously that's causing lots of other problems, but there's economic tensions, there's issues with inflation. The protests in Iran have spread to multiple provinces and have evolved into clashes between demonstrators and security force. Reports indicate at least 7 people have died. Here is where it gets wild. The president of the United States decides to chime in and says, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Iranian leaders responded immediately, and they said, Iran's national security chief said, American interference would trigger disruption across the entire region and the destruction of American interests. So, obviously, we have disruption in the Middle East. Obviously, we already bombed Fordo in what is now considered a very unsuccessful attack on Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But in probably what is the most ironic statement of the year, the president of the United States, who has been actively sending out his private Gestapo police force that he calls ICE to harass and intimidate communities, to violently assault protesters, to shoot pepper balls at the heads of priests standing outside the Broadview facility, committing actual crimes against humanity on a daily basis in the United States of America. The president says, hey, Iran, if you don't treat your peaceful protesters with more respect, we're going to start sending in the troops. That is insane. That is insane. But what this actually does is it gives the Iranian government exactly what it wants. It gives it an external enemy now. So instead of dealing with their own internal political crisis, they are now, hey, everyone, it's us versus the United States of America. It's us versus this, giant foreign imperial government and their deranged, cankles-ridden, bruised-hand president. Obviously, the Iranian people deserve better governance. They deserve an economy that works for them. But we also deserve these things too. We deserve to be free from the fear of a government shooting protesters in our streets. And Trump's second term has been, of course, the most violent administration towards peaceful protest in quite some time. I would argue in history, but obviously the history of the United States is dotted with police acting in the interests of the wealthy to squash peaceful protest. It's been happening literally for centuries in the United States. But to close out the conversation, the president of the United States interfering with economic protests in Iran by saying, hey, you better be nice to the peaceful protesters in Iran, while his masked Gestapo force terrorizes the country, scaring citizens, as we already discussed, illegally arresting United States citizens and telling them that the DHS-approved Real ID that we forced them to get is not a verifiable method of citizenship. so that they conduct raids on construction sites without warrants and they arrest American citizens. The only predicate for arresting those American citizens is that they look like they might be Hispanic, meanwhile leaving white and black workers at the same site. And we're worried about Iran and how they're treating Iranian protesters. The call is coming from within the house. That's our theme really for the show today. How do all of the stories wrap themselves together? How do they wrap themselves up with the same theme? And the theme for today is really the call, my friends. The call is coming from inside the house, whether that is the president lying about how to, or not lying, but being like incredibly hypocritical about peaceful protest, or whether that is DHS forcing us all to get real IDs for the purpose of literally proving our citizenship. That's why we got that. That's literally why we got real IDs. I don't know. This story drives me nuts. We get real IDs and they say, oh, no, not like that. Real IDs, that's not actually a thing. Then student loans, right? Making it so basically if you want to get your student loan repaid or forgiven, you have to have the ideology of the administration, or whether that's, starving children in Minnesota over fraud. The president, a 34-time convicted felon, has no right to talk to anyone about fraud. Or then whether, of course, that's what this president, Jeffrey Epstein, and literally dozens of powerful men did to children in this country, in this place. The phone call, the pipeline is coming from within Epstein's pipeline was Mar-a-Lago. There are obviously many other pipelines, but for this president, this administration to talk about protecting anyone, fraud anything, security anything, immigration anything, peaceful anything, it's absurd. That's why we have the Ignition News. We want to bring you those unfiltered, uncensored stories. We're super proud of the show. It's getting better every episode. Every single episode is getting better. And that's because of your support. So if you're new to the show, it's your first time watching on the live stream, I want to let you know you're not in the cool kids club until you go ahead and subscribe, whether that's on Spotify or Substack or on YouTube. The show is actually growing fastest on YouTube, which is the platform I am least comfortable with. So, that's my challenge for you this new year. If I can get better at something that's hard for me, you can get better at something that's hard for you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the January 2nd edition of the Ignition News. We'll see you back on January 3rd. The Ignition News is brought to you by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise, and streams on the Rebel Radio Network. We'll see you tonight for Rebel Radio. It's going to be a lot of fun, everybody. The Ignition News is brought to you by the Rebel Radio Network, your daily source for updates, unfiltered, and uncensored news. Please consider following us at Spotify, Substack, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. And to support the show, go to theignition.news. Theignition.news. Your support helps to keep us in the know and to keep your information flowing on our daily news source. Thank you for following today's episode of The Ignition News. We'll see you tomorrow.